My husband's ex and male tried to humiliate me for years until their almost anniversary stunt backfired and he finally cut them off for good. For reference, I, 28F, and my husband Shaw, 28M, have been married for 2 years. Shaw and I dated for 2 years before, but we'd known each other since high school. We didn't start dating for a few years after graduation. I met him at a restaurant unexpectedly, exchanged numbers, went on a few dates, and that's how we ended ourselves here, nearly 4 years later. Shaw was dating Diane, another high school girl, before I met her. She was a grade below us and had known Shaw since middle school. He and I were not really close, but we had a lot of shared acquaintances back in school, so I saw a lot of him and Diane together. After we graduated from high school, I lost touch with him because he moved to college in a distant state and we didn't see much of one another. When we finally met at the restaurant some years later, I asked him about Diane. He told me that they had split up a year and a half ago. She was the one who dumped him because she wanted different things in life and needed a break to travel the world. But she promised to come back to him someday. Which simply meant she wanted to be alone for a time, date other men without guilt, and retain Shaw as a backup plan. So, following the breakup, he remained friends with her but reduced contact. By the time we met, he'd nearly completely moved on from Diane. I had also begun to see him in a new light. He had matured much since our previous meeting in high school. Shaw and I reconnected 4 years ago and soon became friends. We still have the same laid-back relationship. He claims that is something he never had with Diane. She was continually trying to get him to chase after her because she thought it made her more beautiful. She flirted with other guys, went out with her friends without speaking to him for days, and never asked Shaw how he felt about anything. He stayed with her because he was young and stupid, and he felt obligated to make the relationship work because they had been together for so long. Another factor was that his mother, Sharon, 49F, was a major fan of Diane. Diane had met my mother-in-law numerous times while they were together. Sharon praised Diane and pretended to be someone else whenever Diane visited. According to Shaw, Diane did the same thing for Sharon, showering her with accolades and acting like a completely different person to impress her. They would chat about other people, particularly Shaw's female acquaintances, whom he despised, and sometimes even about him. Shaw's aunts and cousins. Diane is also conventionally attractive, which makes Sharon appreciate her even more. I'm not sure why that exists, but it does. Shaw told me that Sharon continued to invite Diane to family occasions and holiday dinners after their breakup. He tried talking to his mother about it, urging her not to invite Diane, but Sharon refused. She stated that she really liked her and that even though they had split up, she and Diane remained friends, so she saw nothing wrong with inviting her around. They spoke almost every other week and were really good friends. So this persisted even after I began dating Shaw and he introduced me to his family. I felt strange about it at first, and still do. But there was a reason I had tolerated it for so long. Shaw initially brought me home to meet his family for Christmas 4 years ago. We had been dating for about 8 months. Diane was also present, and she treated me horribly the entire time. She noticed my appearance, height, clothes, makeup, you name it. She was skilled enough to make everything sound funny, as if she was joking, but Shaw knew exactly what she was doing and stood up for me. Sharon, on the other hand, quickly shut it down and asked me if I had a problem with Diane's jokes, putting me in the position. I knew that if I indicated I wasn't good with it, they'd make it appear as if I was insecure or jealous, putting me down even further. So I resolved to present a strong front and say, I don't care. It was petty of me, but the moment I said it, I saw their expressions. They seemed surprised and annoyed. That's when I realized I'd done the correct thing. When Shaw and I came home, he apologized to me for Sharon and Diane's behavior. He promised me he'd make sure his mother stopped inviting Diane to family functions. But I was the one who warned him not to do that. I knew the type of woman they were, and I didn't want to lose to them, if you get my drift. I didn't want them to believe they were intimidating me or making me feel insecure. Because they had not. And I felt compelled to prove it. I explained this to Shaw, and although he was astonished by my approach, he stopped interfering after that day. Since then, Diane has attended every single family function Sharon has thrown. Every time they act the same way with me. Snide remarks. Backhanded compliments. Constant attempts to bring up Diane's past with Shaw, even when it is entirely unrelated, in order to make things difficult for me. I've confronted everything with a brave face, and I try to remain as unmoved as possible. Sharon has even stated multiple times that Diane was her ideal daughter-in-law and would have made a better bride for Shaw. Indirectly, of course. It was bothersome, but I tried to seem unconcerned. Because as long as Shaw was by my side, I didn't mind what others said. Sharon and Diane could talk for hours on end, and it wouldn't matter to me. That's how I've handled things for the past 4 years. And I intended to maintain the same mindset for the next 4. I was not going to be the first one to snap, that was for sure. Now let's get into what actually happened, the incident that brought me here. Sharon became 49 years old 3 days ago. Every year, she throws a big celebration for her family and friends. This year, Shaw did not want to attend. Instead, he wanted to attend his co-worker's engagement celebration, which happened to fall on the same day. And he had good reasons. His co-worker was only getting engaged once, and they were really close. However, Sharon refused to accept it. She made him pledge to attend her birthday party instead. And after days of pressure, she wore him out. So we decided to go. Diane was invited to the function, just like any other. And she dressed to the nines. For some reason, Sharon was also overdressed. But it was her birthday, so I let that one go. Shaw and I had agreed to leave after Sharon cut the cake and attend the engagement celebration. At around 5:30 p.m., my father-in-law brought out the cakes, and to our astonishment, there were 2. One of them stated, "Happy almost anniversary." Shaw and I were puzzled. We had no idea what the other cake meant, and neither did anyone else. We waited for the birthday girl to explain. Instead, Diane took over. To our surprise, she took Shaw's arm and dragged him to stand close to her. We were too surprised to respond because he had suddenly been forced into the spotlight, and everyone was staring at him. Then Diane began chatting. She began by telling that almost 10 years ago, on Sharon's birthday, Shaw had gotten down on one knee and handed her a promise ring. They were both 18 years old at the time, set to go to various colleges. 10 years later, she still wore the same ring. To prove that, she proudly raised her hand in front of everyone. Then she wrapped Shaw in an awkward hug, which he did not respond to. Sharon encouraged them, smiling as she explained that she was ready to let them steal her thunder this time so they could enjoy what may have been. The whole situation was so absurd that Shaw and I stood there with our mouths agape, just like the rest of the guests. For several minutes, no one spoke. Because what could you possibly say in response to something this insane? But Diane kept going. She joked about Shaw being her almost husband, and Sharon being her almost mother-in-law, thus today was their almost anniversary. As if we didn't get the joke. Then Sharon sliced the so-called anniversary cake. She started by feeding Diane a slice. Then she tried feeding it to Shaw. That's when Shaw appeared to snap back to reality. He backed away from his mother when she brought the cake close to his mouth. Sharon was astonished and questioned him, "What's wrong?" That's when all hell broke loose. Shaw exploded. He began shouting at Sharon and Diane, calling them out for what they had just done. Years of pent-up rage eventually spilled out, right there, in the thick of the celebration. He ripped into them, calling them shallow, ignorant, and so self-centered that they had become entirely insane. He admitted that he felt humiliated to have ever been engaged with Diane. He was even more mortified that he was biologically connected to Sharon. Because they were the trashiest women he'd ever met. I have to admit that his reaction surprised me. Shaw is normally a pretty calm guy. He rarely yells or gets furious with others. It takes a lot to drive him to the brink. But Sharon and Diane had finally finished it. With each other's assistance, of course. After shouting at them, Shaw stormed out of the party, followed by me. Instead, we took a taxi directly to his co-worker's place. I tried to talk to him in the cab, but he was clearly agitated. He said he didn't want to talk about his mother or his ex at that time. So I dropped it. When we arrived at the engagement party, his attitude gradually improved as he greeted his friends and coworkers. I was happy to see he was doing well. When we returned home, Shaw was in a much better mood. So I decided to bring up what happened at Sharon's party again, hoping that he would want to talk about it now. But he didn't. Instead, I received an earful about how some of this was also my fault. When I recalled the event, he admitted that Sharon and Diane had attempted to embarrass me with that ludicrous cake. But I wasn't completely innocent. He reminded me that for years, I had forced him to remain silent and let Sharon and Diane do whatever they wanted. Because I felt I needed to demonstrate that I didn't care. I had made it all about myself. My urge to show others how unconcerned I was. But in doing so, I entirely forgot that Shaw was equally implicated in this mess as I was. And it was getting on his nerves. While Sharon, Diane, and I were competing in mind games, Shaw was hurting. Nobody bothered to check on him or ask how he felt about anything. He did not anticipate his mother or ex to show him any consideration. But he expected it of me. And in that moment, he told me something that struck me hard. I'd let him down by prioritizing my own feelings over his in the scenario. That night, I protested with him, telling him that he was being far too harsh and cruel to me. But now that I've had time to think about it, I believe he was correct. I had pushed my husband to remain silent for years while his mother welcomed his ex to family gatherings only to bring me down. Okay, I apologized to Shah this evening. I read the comments, did some reflection, and even discussed it with a few of my friends. I concluded that I was in the wrong here, and that what he said that day was accurate. I had been putting my feelings before of his, and I was so busy behaving as if Diane and Sharon's behavior didn't disturb me that I didn't even consider the possibility that it did bother Shah. For his sake, I should have allowed him terminate this if he wanted to. I forced him to ignore his own feelings for years so that I could win a sick mind game with individuals I didn't even like. And in doing so, I risked the one connection that was most important to me. I had made a serious mistake and realized I needed to make amends. Shah had been giving me the cold shoulder since the party, and I had tried to pretend it didn't bother me. It's something I've always done, and it's been a problem for a long time. My natural reaction is to pretend that things don't upset me, even when they do. I want to be viewed as unconcerned and unaffected by anything, so I act like it and suppress my emotions. I now recognize that this is a really harmful coping method. I absolutely need to work on this if I want my marriage to work. I skipped work today and decided to get him dinner at his favorite restaurant, as well as a chocolate cake with the words, "I'm sorry," written on it. I returned home, set everything up, and tried to make it as romantic as possible, because I know he likes sappy rom-com style apologies. Also, I was really sorry for what I had put him through, even if it was inadvertent. He arrived home from work in the evening and was surprised to see what I had planned for him. He forgave me within 15 minutes of his arrival. We had a tearful reconciliation, and I ended up crying because I was afraid I'd lose him over it. When he wasn't speaking to me, I felt completely adrift. We spoke it out, and everything is well between us now. Since I admitted my mistake, I revealed to him my constant desire to be viewed as calm and laid back, someone nonchalant for no other reason than it seems cool, and because I don't want to be vulnerable in front of others. That is the underlying explanation for this entire catastrophe. He recognized and respected the fact that I admitted it and stated that I needed to work on it rather than shoving it down and suppressing my emotions. He also apologized for being nasty to me, which I don't believe he needed to do. He did it because he is a good man and loves me, which makes me feel like I have won in life. After supper, we finally discussed what had transpired to Diane and Sharon. I hadn't heard from either of them since the party, and my battle with Shah had pushed the whole issue out of my mind. Sharon, on the other hand, had been continually texting Shah, attempting to persuade him to apologize to Diane, who was supposedly distraught and stricken with grief as a result of Shah's treatment of her. I had to work pretty hard not to roll my eyes when I read the messages Sharon sent. She was clearly attempting to guilt-trip him into apologizing to the woman. Sharon pretended that the cake and the entire almost anniversary farce were nothing more than a joke. There was nothing deeper behind it. But I called BS on it. This was a married man they were pulling this scam on. Surely, they had the intelligence to recognize how improper and insulting this was towards me. They did it on purpose, since they wanted to humiliate me during the party. So they couldn't simply dismiss it by saying, "It was just a joke," and pretend Shah had overreacted. The hubris of them to claim that Shah and I had gone too far or disrespected them by leaving the party was ridiculous. Shah had previously been ignoring her communications, but when I got those messages today, we finally agreed to stop communicating with her. We'd had enough of her crap. And we didn't want any part of it anymore. 3 days ago, Shah and I blocked Sharon from all of our social media accounts. Shah also told his father that he didn't want to speak with his mother anymore. His father appreciated his decision, because he knew Shah's emotions. But he also refused to interfere. He loves his wife and knows he can't leave her, so he's remaining completely out of it, as he has for the past 5 years. I don't agree with my father-in-law's attitude, but I can't do anything about it. Everything had been running perfectly for the preceding 2 days. But then, today, Shah contacted me out of the blue and said he needed to run to the hospital. Apparently, his mother had fallen from the top of the steps and fractured her leg. Shah's maternal uncle had informed him, and he fled immediately upon hearing the news. We both arrived at the hospital at roughly the same time. But before we could enter, Sharon stopped us in our tracks, and she was perfectly well. She and Diane had surprised us in the hospital's parking lot. Then they nonchalantly informed us that this was the only way to grab Shah's attention, because he had blocked them everywhere. They didn't expect me to show up with him. Instead of acknowledging me, they ignored me and began talking to Shah as if they had done nothing wrong. Diane attempted to explain that everything she did at the party was a prank and that she never meant to insult him. Sharon backed her up. Shah allowed them to converse for a bit. And then, much to their surprise, he told his mother and ex to F off. Then he went away with me once more. Sharon started shouting at us as we got into our different cars. But we didn't stay around to hear what she had to say. I'm sure she was cursing at us, but it didn't matter. She lied to get to meet Shah again. And I couldn't think of anything more manipulative than that. Shah returned home because he was too stressed. I, on the other hand, needed to return to work. While at work, I received a call from an unknown number. It turned out to be Sharon. She screamed at me for 15 seconds before I finally disconnected the call. I'd merely been taken off guard while working. Else, I wouldn't have responded. All I heard were hand-picked swear words spoken at maximum volume. I had no idea why she was furious at me. I had nothing to do with Shah's behavior. She had pushed her own son to that point, not me. Anyway, I blocked her and attempted to go on with my day. When I came back home at 6 p.m., I finally got to speak with Shah. He told me that he had also blocked the rest of his mother's relatives, including his uncle, because it was obvious that they would go to any length to persuade him to forgive Sharon and speak with her. That's all we can do right now since they're not threatening us in any manner, and they're not stalking us on a regular basis, so a restraining order is not an option. Shah also told his father about what happened today, but he still refuses to intervene. It's his choice, and Shah adores his father, so I won't say anything right now. But, personally, I don't think my father-in-law's behavior is a wonderful example of being a good father. The least he could do was speak to his wife and advocate for his son. But he won't even do it. Shah adores his father, but the man has never stood up for him when it comes to Sharon. I've only kept my mouth shut out of respect for their relationship. Otherwise, I'd have a lot to say about how incredibly selfish his entire family is. They never think about anyone other than themselves. I will never understand how a man like Shah could come from such a family. Hello everyone, it's been a week since I last updated. Yesterday, Shah and I decided to file a restraining order against Sharon and Diane because of something they did to me. Or, more precisely, attempted to do. 3 days ago, on Thursday, I was returning from work. On Thursdays, I normally go to a coffee shop near my office and purchase myself a frappuccino as a treat. Last Thursday, I was planning to do the same. But as soon as I walked into the shop, Diane and Sharon rose from their chairs, where they had been waiting for me, and rushed straight at me with their coffees. Before I could even respond, they both flung their drinks in my face. Then Diane took some whipped cream from her cup and put it into my hair. I was stunned. I just froze on the spot as everyone laughed. The baristas ran over to assist me clean up. They did their best to remove the muck off of me, so a big thanks to them for basically quitting their work to assist me. Even the other customers were patient and kind. When I finally got the most of it off, my clothing were sticky and unpleasant, and my hair was horrible, but at least I was cleaner. Some of the other patrons inquired about me, and one even asked if I wanted to contact the cops. So I did. I reported Diane and Sharon and filed charges against them. However, they just received a fine, a slap on the wrist, because this was a misdemeanor and they had not physically hurt me. Unless you consider my clothes, which I can't wear to work again due to fading brown coffee stains on the front. Nonetheless, we filed charges, and the incident is now on their record, which will strengthen our case. Shah wanted to make this public, so he posted about it on social media so that more people would be aware and avoid Diane and his mother. But he changed his mind when he saw I just wanted to move on from this without any further complications. Honestly, that encounter shook me more than I expected. It may seem ridiculous, but it actually made me think. If things had escalated, it might have been far worse than them throwing coffee in my face. They could have really injured me if they wanted to. They were familiar with my routine thanks to my social media presence. They had my address. This could have gone extremely wrong. Shah and I had been considering moving since we had a good financial year. But with what occurred, we will definitely be going. We had also been thinking about having children and we're going to start trying soon. But my in-laws will never meet my children. We've also formally cut off my father-in-law, who refused to intervene even after the coffee incident. Shah got into a heated argument with him and eventually cut him off. And honestly, I am relieved. I'll never have to see or hear from these folks again. Thank you for watching. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do so and hit the notification bell to stay updated with more shocking real-life stories happening around you.